Congresswoman Norton, Chairman Mendelson, distinguished guests and residents of the District of Columbia watching live on DC Channel 16 and streaming on Mayor Bowser's social media platforms. Good afternoon. I'm Kimberly Bassett, Secretary of State of the District of Columbia, home of the Washington Nationals, go-go music, cherry blossoms, and the nation's first Black Lives Matter Plaza. It is now 2 p.m. on the 14th day of December in the year of 2020. It's my honor to call to order the 15th meeting of the Electoral College of the District of Columbia. We will now have a musical tribute by urban jazz artist Fred Yane, one of the most talented and innovative harmonicists on the international music scene today. He toured with Prince and Stevie Wonder. He's a Ward 6 resident, and he will now perform his version of the Star Spangled Banner. Please welcome Frederick Yane. Thank you, Fred. Mayor Bowser, the District of Columbia Board of Elections has successfully certified the 2020 general election held on Tuesday, November 3rd, and has issued the declaration of winners for the office of electors of President and Vice President of the United States of America. Each certified elector is qualified and registered to vote in the District of Columbia. Is certified to have resided in the District of Columbia continuously for the period of 3 years, immediately preceding the election on November 3rd, 2020, and that each elector has taken an oath to vote the Electoral College for Vice President and presidential nominees of the Democratic Party. It is now my pleasure to present to you the following members of the Electoral College for 2020. Please signify your presence by saying aye when your name is called. Meady Barnelli.
Aye.
Barbara Helmick.
Aye.
Jacqueline Thompson Echeverria.
Aye.
By the authority of the District of Columbia Code in the prescribed section 11212G, the electors have been duly affirmed to cast the ballots of vote for their President and Vice President of the United States of America, and to affix their signatures to the certificates of vote for the District of Columbia. I will now turn the proceedings of the 15th District of Columbia Electoral College over to the Mayor of the District of Columbia, Mayor Muriel Bowser.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Madam Secretary. I'm very pleased to be here with you, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, Council Chairman Phil Mendelson, D.C. Democratic Party Chair Charles Wilson, and our residents watching online this historic election. I would also like to acknowledge members of our statehood delegation, members of the council, and members of the D.C. Board of Elections and staff. We are here today to cast, witness, and certify the District of Columbia's 3 electoral college votes for President and Vice President of the United States of America. Across the nation, governors and other electors are similarly gathered to participate in the certification of their electoral votes as a result of the presidential election on November 3rd, 2020. Each of you can attest to the challenges we face as a nation and world in 2020. Today, however, we celebrate and rededicate ourselves to our democratic institutions and their endurance. The 2020 presidential election was historic for many reasons. More than 155 million votes were cast throughout the United States, by mail, in person, at sports arenas, in drop boxes. In the midst of a pandemic, millions of Americans still made their voices heard. Here in D.C., more than 330,000 voters cast their ballots across all 8 wards. And through the dedication of poll workers, volunteers, and voters, our institutions held. I want to thank and celebrate these 3 extraordinary women. Today, with our all-women team of frontline workers, we celebrate 100 years since American women won access to the ballot box. We honor the resiliency of the activists who kept fighting to make sure that access was inclusive, and we shine a spotlight on all the workers who led us through 2020 with courage and compassion. This meeting marks the 15th convening of the District of Columbia's Electoral College, and I am very delighted to host you here today. We know so much has happened this year, including the very first vote in Congress in favor of D.C. statehood. It is my hope that 4 years from now, we cast our votes as the 51st state in our nation. But first things first, I've asked D.C. Democratic Party Chair Charles Wilson to do the honor of introducing our electors. And I also would like to acknowledge the leadership from the D.C. Democratic Party who has joined Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson, please join me at the podium.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Charles Wilson, and I'm the chair of the D.C. Democratic Party, the leading Democratic organization here in the District of Columbia. Today I'm joined by our vice chair, Ms. Linda Gray, our national committee woman, Ms. Sylvia Martinez, and our national committee man, Mr. Jack Evans. Our party is so excited to have 3 incredible and, yes, dynamic female presidential electors this year, each of whom has made tremendous contributions to their communities and our country. This is the first time in DC history that we have had 3 female electors. And we are so proud to do this in the 100-year anniversary of the women's suffrage movement. We truly couldn't have picked 3 better electors. As an organization, we've been focused on moving the needle for our community and our nation as a whole. While there may be struggles within the Democratic Party as far as what issues we should be focusing on or what positions we should take on policies, the one thing we know for certain is the only way to move is forward. By selecting an all-woman slate of electors, we are moving the needle closer to equality and reflective representation. By having our party be inclusive of Democrats of all stripes, whether you're a centrist or a leftist, we are supporting the necessity for dialogue that helps our organization become stronger. Midi, Jacqueline, and Barbara are all experts in their fields, each serving DC in ways that may not be seen, but always need. They're advocating for progress in nursing and the healthcare world, the fight for workers' rights, and yes, in our quest for DC statehood. Their leadership and the leadership of so many district residents is what makes the difference, is what will make the difference for the future of our party and the future of our country. And it's people like them we need to thank for this progress. So we are excited, so excited to see them cast their official votes for President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. And we thank you for helping us make history.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the selection of this exceptional group of electors. And electors, thank you for agreeing to serve in yet another important way for the District of Columbia. The official ballots for the 2020 presidential election in the District of Columbia will now be cast by the electors. Before each of you is a folder with your official ballots. Each of you also has your own ceremonial pen. Please take your pen and mark with an X the person for whom you will vote. As I call your name, please state the name of the person for whom you voted for President of the United States. Midi Bardinelli, for whom did you vote?
Joseph Biden.
Barbara Helmick, for whom did you vote?
Joseph Biden.
Jacqueline Thompson Echeverria, for
Yes.
whom did you vote?
Joseph R. Biden, Jr.
Thank you, electors. Please take your pen and mark with an X for whom you will vote for Vice President of the United States of America. Midi Bardinelli, for whom did you vote?
Kamala D. Harris.
Barbara Melmick, for whom did you vote?
Kamala D. Harris.
Jacqueline Thompson Echeverria, for whom did you vote?
Kamala D. Harris.
You have witnessed, ladies and gentlemen, the electors cast the 3 electoral votes for the District of Columbia for Joseph R. Biden for President of the United States and 3 electoral votes from the District of Columbia for Kamala Harris for Vice President of the United States. The next step in the vote process is the certificate of vote. The Secretary will collect the ballots. And then I think that my part in this process will proceed to each certificate of ascertainment and certificate of vote will now be placed in individually pre-addressed envelopes for transmittal and recording. The envelopes will go to the President of the Senate, the Honorable Michael Pence, the Chief Judge of the Federal District Court for the District of Columbia, the Honorable Anita Josie Herring. 2, to the Archivist of the United States, David Ferriero. And the final 2 are kept with us, with the Office of the Secretary for the District of Columbia for review for 1 year. Before I turn the podium back to Secretary Bassett, I did want to acknowledge and thanks once again individually the members of the DC Board of Elections who had an exceptional job in executing the primary and general elections in the District of Columbia. Chairman Michael Bennett, Member Michael Gill, and Member Karen Greenfield. Please give them a round of applause. I also want to acknowledge the Executive Director of the DC Board of Elections, Alice Miller. Thank you for your service to the district, and thank you, electors.
Thank you, Mayor. All right, this is so exciting. Some of you may know Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr. He's chair of the African American Studies program at Princeton University, and you may know him from his work on MSNBC, Meet the Press, and Time magazine. Dr. Glaude's ability to engage people of all ages and backgrounds, to act and think critically about our nation, has played a continuous role in upholding the ideas of our democracy. I'm pleased now to introduce Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Eddie Glaude, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. I want to thank Mayor Bowser, Secretary Bassett, and the 2020 electors. I want to thank all of the dignitaries who are here for taking time out of your schedules, and I hope I have something to say that may be of some use. You know, a few days ago, I found myself thumbing through the pages of Saidiya Hartman's exquisite book, Lose Your Mother, A Journey Along the Atlantic Slave Route. She travels to Ghana in the book, and there Hartman follows the trails of captives from the hinterland to the Atlantic coast. Hers was not a reclamation of some lost past. She traveled instead in search of what she calls strangers, those like herself torn from kin and from country. My eyes were drawn to a formulation that has acquired a certain kind of resonance these days, at least in the academy. Hartman writes, quote, "I wanted to engage the past, knowing that its perils and dangers still threatened, and that even now lives hung in the balance. Slavery had established a measure of man and a ranking of life and worth that has yet to be undone. If slavery persists," she writes, "as an issue in the political life of Black America, it is not because of an antiquarian obsession with bygone days or the burden of a too-longed memory, but because Black lives are still imperiled and devalued by a racial calculus and political arithmetic that were entrenched centuries ago. This is the afterlife of slavery. Skewed life chances, limited access to health and education, premature death, incarceration, and impoverishment. I too am the afterlife of slavery," end quote. This phrase, the afterlife of slavery, that we continue to live in its shadows and find ourselves shaped by the decisions made in its defense, even today. It haunts, you know. And of course, the phrase can flatten some of the differences that emerge after the demise of the peculiar institution. If there is an afterlife of slavery, there is also an afterlife of Jim Crow. These are different but profoundly aligned forms of domination. But I don't want to go too far afield here, and I also don't want you to think that I'm being a bit too abstract on this day and tending to my own academic concerns. I think the afterlife of slavery has some utility for us now. Whenever we take up the vexing issue of the Electoral College, we are grappling with the afterlife of slavery. To be sure, the creation of the Electoral College was one response to the deep-seated fears about the power of the executive branch, that somehow the president might be corrupted by forces of greed and the like. Sounds familiar. That someone might enter into office and seek to abuse executive power. And so this was one method to constrain that power. I wonder what they would think about today, I suppose. It also reflected a profound suspicion of the demos, that ordinary people could not be solely responsible for the election of the president. That, for them, the framers, would be too much democracy. But the Electoral College is also bound up with the issue of slavery. Those in the South knew that they would be disadvantaged by a broad-based democracy, by a system driven simply by the popular vote. Much of the South's population could not vote because they were slaves. They were somebody else's property. And what we see is a system, and what we see in the Electoral College is a system based on the logic of the Three-Fifths Compromise. And let's be clear, that compromise had nothing really to do with Black folk. It wasn't an assessment of our relative standing as human beings, as we're wont to say at times. We were mere chattel, the possession of white folks. That compromise was all about white people, an act that continues to resonate in our own moment, an act which gave white votes more weight and justified the ongoing effort to keep those votes more meaningful than others. Race and slavery contributed to the framers' creation of the Electoral College. We cannot forget that. It set in motion this idea that white votes ought to be weighted more. As Hartman reminds us, we continue to live in the afterlife of slavery, not only in terms of skewed life chances, but in the very way it distorts our democracy today. Giving added weight to white votes is something we continue to live with. We saw it in the gutting of the Voting Rights Act with Shelby County v. Holder. We see it in voter ID laws and voter suppression efforts. We hear it in the rhetoric of the Trump campaign and Donald Trump himself as they falsely claim voter fraud in Metro Atlanta and Philadelphia and Detroit and Milwaukee, trying desperately to rob us of the franchise, to diminish our influence on the polity. In so many ways, Black voters are damned if you do and damned if you don't. When we don't turn out to vote, the country chooses the likes of Donald Trump. And when we do turn out, they try to rob us of the franchise. This added weight to white voting, I think, can be seen in the refusal to grant statehood to D.C. To my mind, this isn't just about Washington, D.C. or Puerto Rico, that these territories, that this place would lean Democratic. It has something to do with the actual bodies inhabiting these places. Can you imagine the country refusing such a status to a place that was predominantly white? I can't. Even with gentrification, I can't. All of this, I believe, is bound up with an idea of who we are as a country and our refusal to confront the enduring legacies of slavery and Jim Crow and their distorting effects on our democracy. We continue to live in a society that values white people, particularly white straight men, more than others. And that valuation is evident in the very structures of our democratic form of life. In so many ways, we stand as a nation on a knife's edge. COVID-19 continues to ravage the country, revealing the deep inequalities that define our way of life, in effect, revealing the afterlife of slavery and Jim Crow. With over 3,000 dead in one day, and we're closing in over 300,000 dead. We are mourning as a country. The dead overwhelms. This scale of death, however, has revealed in some ways the state of our national character. We seem to be a selfish nation, rife with greed and hatred. Our task in this moment is to do the impossible, to be bold in the face of what seems to be unmovable forces, to care deeply, to ask hard questions, and to take rude positions. We have to step into a new way of being together, and that will require of us to finally leave behind this insidious idea that white people matter more than others and the lies we tell to protect that fact. You know, in The Republic of Suffering, written by Drew Faust, she wrote about the Civil War, and she said that death, quote, created the modern American Union, not just by ensuring national survival, but by shaping enduring national structures and commitments. Death, she writes, inspired self-scrutiny and self-definition. Think of the thousands of Civil War photographs of the dead and what those images forced the nation to remember. You know, this seems to be anathema in the age of Trump. We have more images and videos of police killing Black people than we do of the carnage of COVID-19. Today, the dead from coronavirus is principally a private affair, where a sense of shared suffering is fleeting at best. With the virus, that death has shown us our disunion. We have to imagine ourselves otherwise. We have to confront the afterlife of slavery. We can no longer live in its shadow. Mayor Bowser, you have exhibited a kind of bold and visionary leadership that our moment requires. Continue to step outside of the traps of the political culture. Speak the truth and act on behalf of the most vulnerable among us. The symbolic significance of an all-woman electoral lineup signals a commitment not simply to symbolic representation, but an insistence on a new world where all of us, no matter our gender, our color, our zip code, or who we love or our ability, can become who God has called us to be. We need to move beyond symbolic representation and understand that substantive policy is what is needed in this moment to transform this country, to speak on behalf of those who are being devastated by COVID-19, to speak to the reality of those who are bearing the brunt of this country's contradictions. The afterlife of slavery shadows this place. We have to acknowledge that fact if we are going to be otherwise. We have to tell the truth why D.C. is denied statehood, why the Electoral College still skews our politics and announces a generalized distrust in the people. We have to tell the truth about white supremacy and how it distorts our characters and blocks the way to us becoming the kinds of people that our democracy requires. We're on a knife's edge, folks, and much is required of us. Now, we all have been birthed in the American fantasy of itself as an example of democracy achieved. That fantasy has all too often distorted and disfigured our moral sense because it requires that we lie to ourselves about what we have done. And a lie that thrives on a kind of willful ignorance makes this place and us monstrous. I believe it is our task to do exactly what Baldwin called for in 1962. That's James Baldwin. That we, quote, mount an unending attack on all that Americans believe themselves to hold sacred, end quote. It is to unmask the panic at the root of our way of life, the panic that keeps the reality that the institution of slavery and Jim Crow unleashed alive in our day. The past presidential election came then in this moment of moral reckoning. But I pray that we do not trade one fantasy for another, that Donald Trump's defeat will somehow affirm America's inherent goodness and put a grateful republic back to sleep. We must remember that presidential elections alone, no matter how momentous, do not settle the question of who we take ourselves to be. The answer to that question will emerge in what we do now, moving forward. In as much truth as one could bear, James Baldwin wrote, quote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." Sadia Hartman decided to retrace the journey along the coast, to visit the barracoons, to find not a lost mother, but to find solidarity among strangers. Baldwin's formulation, like Hartman's journey, involves a confrontation not only with the past, but with the present. Not everything can be faced. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. Such powerful words for our country and for you. We cannot stick our heads in the sand this time. We cannot tinker around the edges and leave the old frame intact. You and I must shake loose from the shibboleths of the past and their gods and begin again. And we must remember that no matter what has been done, no matter the death that shadows our steps, we cannot turn away from our responsibility. Let's begin again right where we are. Let's risk everything to finally put the sin of racism behind us and figure out how to be together differently. That is going to require something extraordinary from us. But as James Baldwin said, and I believe firmly in my heart, human beings are at once miracles and disasters. If we show up and risk ourselves in this moment, even in the shadow of slavery and Jim Crow, we at least have a chance for a miracle. Thank you, and take care, and have a wonderful holiday.
Well, thank you, Dr. Glad, for those remarks that place this election in the context of our country, but also places the challenge in all of us to acknowledge what we're doing here today in electing a vice president and president of the United States, but also it challenges us to think about how we will approach our work and ourselves with a new president. It is my pleasure now to recognize and introduce to the stage our Congresswoman who had a momentous year representing us in the Congress and advancing our cause for statehood, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Thank you very much, Mayor Bowser. Chairman Mendelson, members of the Council, Democratic Party Chairman Charles Wilson, invited speakers and guests, and most especially our esteemed electors, to whom we are enormously grateful, our well-chosen electors. It is particularly important this year to mark the occasion of the district casting 3 electoral votes. 2020 will always be remembered as a historic year for this vote. After all, it's the centennial year of women's suffrage, which we recognize by having an all-women essential worker slate of electors representing the district. It is the district's 15th opportunity to cast votes for president of the Electoral College, although this city has been in existence 219 years. And most historic of all, because our bill to award the District of Columbia statehood passed a Chamber of Congress for the first time in 219 years. This year's convening will be remembered as a turning point in our statehood fight. When I introduced H.R. 51, our D.C. statehood bill, on the very first day of the 116th Congress, January 3rd, 1919, I did so right at that moment. We had a record 155 original co-sponsors. That's upon introduction. And continued our fight until we reached 227 co-sponsors, a record. This was more than enough co-sponsors to pass the statehood bill in the House, with co-sponsors alone. In the Senate, we have a record 42 co-sponsors, 90% of the Senate Democrats, and going up every day. We also have built a coalition of support for statehood with over 100 national organizations. Finally, this past summer, by a resounding vote of 232 to 180, the House of Representatives, for the first time in American history, passed our D.C. statehood bill. Every Democrat but one voted for the bill, and I will note that that one just lost his election campaign. That's what happens to you when you vote against D.C. statehood. And over 95% of House Democrats were co-sponsors. When the House convenes for the 117th Congress in January, I am pleased we will have a new record number of original co-sponsors. Currently, 189, more than this Congress, even with fewer Democrats in that Congress coming up than we had last time. Fewer Democrats, more co-sponsors. And I expect that number to grow before January. District residents, mind you, pay more federal taxes per capita than the residents of any state and are the only full tax-paying Americans who are not treated as equal citizens. Since the founding of the nation, district residents have always carried all the obligations of citizenship, including paying federal taxes and serving in all the nation's wars, all without representation on the floor of the House of the Congress, or freedom from congressional interference on purely local matters. In 1960, an overwhelming majority of Congress finally recognized that it was un-American that residents of its nation's capital had no vote for president. And in 1961, the 23rd Amendment was ratified as part of the Constitution. This vote came after years of district residents fighting for representation in the Electoral College, which we celebrate here today. It took a fight as well to gain the vote 100 years ago for the 19th Amendment. Everything takes a fight, my friends. Today, as our 3 District of Columbia women represent us as we cast our electoral votes for President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, champions of D.C. statehood, mind you, we will proceed to the fight for the final element of equality for District of Columbia residents, statehood for the District of Columbia. And this fight does not even require a constitutional amendment. This year, we have come closer than ever to full equality for the citizens of our nation's capital. I now introduce the chair of the DC Council, Phil Mendelson.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Good afternoon. Madam Mayor, Congresswoman Norton, Secretary Bassett, Chairman Wilson, and most importantly, our electors. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here. I have often thought of this event as being a bit anticlimactic. I mean, after all, the election occurred in November 3rd, but we've seen recently through the national discussion, the public discussion, how important today's event is for our democracy. Professor Glaude spoke about the legacy of the afterlife of slavery and Jim Crow. I want to speak for just a moment about democracy and how what we have seen over the last month, in fact, far longer than that, over the last 4 years, has spoken to the preciousness of democracy. And what is democracy? It's as simple as allowing people to vote. But it's more than that. It's about encouraging people to vote. And it's more than that. It's about removing barriers to people voting. But what we've seen in the last period, I don't know if I want to say 4 years or since the election, is efforts to discourage the vote, efforts to delegitimize the vote, falsely claiming fraud, and finally simply saying that the election was stolen when there's no evidence of that. And that's not the way that we further democracy. But it does speak to how precious this institution is and therefore how important today is. I've always thought of this moment when the Electoral College meets, with all due respect, as being more ceremonial. But today it speaks to how important it is. It's a bigger deal than we've ever seen before, because it makes clear who did win the election and where the voters of the district and the voters of this country stood. This occasion also reminds us of our fight for and the importance for statehood. I won't repeat as much as what our Congresswoman said, but there is no reason why the citizens of the United States who live in the District of Columbia should not have the same rights and responsibilities of the citizens of the 50 states. And that's what statehood is all about. I will end with this, which is less important. As was said, 15th convening of the Electoral College, the 7th time the district has cast its votes for the winning candidate. The first electors were Patricia Roberts Harris, Peter Calamaris, and a guy named, and these are my notes, George Joseph Bowden, not to be confused with Joseph Biden. And it's the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, which we reflect today by the fact that our electors are all women. But it also speaks to how much of a struggle is still before us, that is left before us. So it's an honor, as I said, to be here, and thank you, electors, for what you do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is now my pleasure to introduce Catherine Ray, who, in this year, when we celebrate the centennial of the 19th Amendment, represents the women's suffrage movement, and she is accompanied by Morgan Hubbard from the Girl Scout Troop of Cadets 57, acknowledging the past, present, and future. Electors Bartonelli, Helmick, and Thompson Echeverria, I want to thank you for your service to the district and casting your votes today.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Honored guests and the 706,000 residents of the District of Columbia, thank you for your support and your attendance. Please stay safe and happy holidays. This 15th meeting of the Electoral College of the District of Columbia is now adjourned. Thank you.